Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, President Donald Trump renews his attack on Harvard University, calling the institution a joke, which he says teaches hate and stupidity. Coming up, we'll have more on that. Plus, we'll examine the president's plans to deport violent criminals to El Salvador. Former US President Joe Biden returns to the spotlight, delivering his first major speech since leaving office in January. Addressing an audience in Chicago, he lambasts what he calls the Trump administration's damage and destruction. Plus, we'll bring you all the latest on the situation in Gaza, where several people are reported to have been killed following an Israeli strike in the northern city of Jabalia. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin in the United States, where President Donald Trump has suggested that some American criminals be deported to prisons in Salvador. Well, he specifically referred to the country's notorious mega-prison, the Counter Terrorism Confinement Center. Well, this proposal came during a meeting with El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele, who is known for his stringent anti-crime measures. So does the law allow him to do this? Well, some US officials are saying that such a move would violate the Constitution.
I said it to Pam. I don't know what the laws are. We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country, but you'll have to be looking at the laws on that, Steve.
Well, let's get more analysis so we can speak now to Amanda Makki, who is an attorney and a Republican strategist and former Republican congressional candidate, who joins us from Florida. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today, Amanda. We've heard President Trump saying he would love to deport homegrown US citizens, he said, specifically violent US prisoners, to El Salvador. Let me just start by asking you who you imagine he had in mind. Who could end up in a prison in El Salvador?
I think that what President Trump is really trying to do is to make sure that not only the illegals who are committing heinous crimes in the United States against Americans are on notice, but also Americans are on notice for crimes that they commit, and that they could end up in somewhere as awful as CCOT. So really what he's trying to do is portray the image that maybe our prisons are all too friendly to prisoners here in the United States, and the real threat of going somewhere like CCOT, where it's terrible conditions. Obviously, these prisons, as we've seen video footage of, the Secretary of Homeland Security was there a couple weeks ago, and really seeing the way that everyone is, 40,000 inmates crammed into these really tight cells. The same meal every day, no protein, straight beans and rice every day for the rest of your life would be enough to deter violent crimes from happening, because what he's trying to do is to stop violent crimes in the United States.
So just to be clear, people could end up in a prison in El Salvador, and yet they have absolutely no ties to that country whatsoever. That's what he's got in mind.
Well, it sounds like that's what he has in mind. It sounds like a lot of flexing too. What he's trying to say is, be aware what we can do and what the repercussions are for your actions. And I think this really goes back to the last 4 years of Democrats being in charge, and the last 4 years of large cities in America, more than a majority, I'd say a super majority, are run by Democrats. And it has gotten so out of hand. Americans are very frustrated with the dangerous society, these dangerous cities that have been created with zero repercussions. We'll talk about shoplifting, but really we're talking more about, murders and really heinous crimes. Someone being torched on a New York subway in December. Literally, a woman was set on fire by an illegal on the subway. These are the types of things that he's trying to ferret out. But again, the shoplifting, it has really changed the dynamic of large cities. I was just in Washington, D.C., and you really can't even get deodorant without having to ask someone help you go behind the shelf, unlock the shelf door to get you something like that, because people are going in and stealing, committing crimes. And as you know, in California, they've said if it's not $1,000 or more, we're not going to prosecute it. So I think what President Trump's really trying to do is to address something that the American people are very concerned about. And I would say President Trump has a really good finger on the pulse of what is driving fear amongst Americans right now. And that is what's happening in large cities and small cities throughout America, but mostly in the urban areas that have been run by Democrats.
But the latest figures I've seen show that the numbers of reported, admittedly, violent crimes, according to the FBI, has actually fallen steadily since the year 1990. In particular, last year, there was in 2023, there was a downturn in the number of reported crimes. So you're talking about shoplifting, but surely a shoplifter wouldn't end up in a prison in El Salvador, would they?
I'm talking about crime in general, and those FBI statistics have been debunked. I think this was discussed during the debate with J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, and they used these FBI statistics, and then they later came back and changed them. So whether the statistics are, higher, the same, even lower, it's what the American people are feeling. And I don't agree with those statistics, just to put it out there. I would say that crime has risen in the United States. And a lot of that is economic pressure people feel sometimes, where they feel the need to steal. So we're talking about two different things when we talk about heinous crimes like murder, and then, talking about shoplifting and that sort of thing. But let's take the example of what happened in Texas 2 weeks ago with a young man who happened to be a twin. He was on the football field of his high school, and he went up to an opposing team, someone who was there from the opposing team, and said, "This is not the section that you're supposed to sit in." And he was stabbed in the heart and died in the arms of his twin brother. This is in a suburban, nice area, part of, the Austin district of Texas. And so when you see these crimes happen, what is a family supposed to think when they have their kids in a middle-class neighborhood, a middle-class school district, and something as heinous as this happens? What about the family of people who have been killed at the hands of illegal immigrants? There was the young nursing student in Georgia. She was a college student on the running trail. She was stabbed, raped, and beaten, left for dead. The woman in Maryland, a mother of 6, she was raped, stabbed, beaten, and left for dead in Maryland. And these individuals have been prosecuted by a jury of their peers. So there is no way in the United States people don't think that they are not worried about what illegals are doing and worried about crime. Crime is a big issue, and maybe one of the top issues in this past election. So President Trump, again, having his finger on the pulse, wants to do what he believes is best for the American people and really tap into those things that the American people fear. And that's one of the big fears that they have.
Well, a study does say that immigrants are significantly less likely to commit a crime than homegrown Americans, as President Trump referred to them. I don't know if you agree with that, but just really as an extension
of... As an immigrant myself, I hope so.
Right. Okay. So it's not really a question about foreigners coming to the United States committing crimes more than Americans who were born in America. I mean, that's
not about them it's not about them committing more crimes. It's about the fact that they have been given a lottery ticket. They have won the lottery of life to come to the United States, just like my family did, just like I did. I was born in Iran. I came here as an immigrant. And if you come here on U.S. soil and you kill someone, yes, that is a big problem. And we are going to deter people who are coming here for nefarious reasons, or that they have mental issues and choose to kill American citizens. And so should every other country. The only country I know that isn't and is prohibiting this is the country of Poland. Every other country in Europe is facing backlash, and their politicians are facing backlash because of this mass number of immigrants that are coming. And again, legal immigration, like my family did, all supportive of it. But when they're coming here illegally, killing our citizens, we're not going to stand for that. And Americans are going to want their leaders in Congress or in the White House to do something about it. And President Trump's doing something about it.
Sure, but if they're significantly less likely to commit a crime than people born in the US, and that's not the key thrust of the crackdown on crime, is it? That's a sideshow.
I mean, people aren't going to say, well, the statistics show that, so that's okay. It's okay that a girl on a college campus in Georgia got killed by an illegal immigrant. That's okay. We're just going to let them keep coming. I mean, that's not the American spirit. That's not what we want. And I think that's where you have President Trump doing what he believes is in the best interest of the American people. I, as an immigrant, don't want to be around dangerous criminals who happen to be illegals. Why should they be here in the first place if their plans are to kill or harm an American in any way, shape, or form? It is a privilege for them to be here, and we don't have to allow them here if they're not going to abide by the rules. And certainly you're seeing that all over the country happen day after day. You're seeing violent crimes happening at the hands of illegals. So the Laken-Riley Act that passed a month ago, the namesake of the Georgia girl that I keep referring to, Laken-Riley in Georgia, these things have to stop. And there's a reason why there was bipartisan support for it. There's a reason why people on the Democrat side, too, who are more open borders, bring all, we'll take all immigrants here. They are concerned about it, too, because their constituents are asking them to do this. Their constituents are concerned about their families, their children. Again, look what happened in Texas just 2 weeks ago. And that didn't involve an illegal immigrant, but I'm saying these are the types of crimes people want to see prosecuted. They don't want to see people get a slap on the wrist for something as violent, as heinous as these types of crimes that are happening around America.
Sure. I just want to ask you, though, wearing your other hat as an attorney, I'd like to ask you about the legalities of all of this. We're reading some reports that say words to the effect there is no provision under US law that allows the government to kick citizens out of the country. I mean, maybe you can tell us, is the law quite clear on this matter of deporting someone who's got no links to El Salvador to go to prison?
Well, what we're talking about with regards to people who are being deported are the people who are not U.S. citizens. So that's a different matter. If you are here under a permanent residency status or some kind of student status, some temporary status, there's definitely no reason why we can't deport you wherever we choose to deport you.
But what about these homegrown US citizens that President Trump was recorded talking about? Can they constitutionally be deported and incarcerated in another country, El Salvador or anywhere else for that matter?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of times where you have these things that third parties are responsible for our prison systems. You don't have every prison run by the U.S. government. You have third-party intermediaries that will run these privately run facilities. And so I think there could be a constitutional question here, certainly. And I'm not a constitutional scholar to come down on this, and certainly the justices will be divided on this, I'm sure. But I think an argument can be made that if the U.S. deems that a U.S. facility, just like they do for private facilities, then it doesn't really matter where the location is, so long as the laws of the U.S. apply. So it's a constitutional question. I would leave it at that.
Sure. I mean, lots of countries have got third parties that manage their prison systems, but I don't think many of them have suggested outsourcing the prison to a different country, certainly the facilities management. Let me just ask you another thing, wearing your Republican strategy hat. We often see and hear President Trump floating these ideas past an audience, whether it's in front of the cameras or in front of an audience. What's the thinking here? Is that to sort of test the waters and see if an idea holds water in the minds of the electorate? Talk us through the strategy.
Well, I think President Trump has made it very clear when he has an idea and something that he is very supportive of, he'll go ahead and do it. And then he'll say, well, okay, now it's time to negotiate. So I think the tariffs are just kind of a perfect example. This is someone who's been talking about tariffs in a very positive manner for the last 4 decades. Whether he was in his private life or in public service, he's always talked about the benefits of tariffs and that they are, quote, a beautiful thing. So he flexed on tariffs. Other countries responded. 70 plus countries came, kind of hat in hand saying, let's negotiate. And, whether you look at it as this was a way to isolate China, whether you look at it as this is just the way the art of the deal works, I think what he likes to do is not go back on his word, implement it, and then say, okay, now we can negotiate. Now you felt the pressure. Now you felt some pain. And now's the best time to strategize and negotiate if that's something that countries are willing to do. So I do think that he's willing to listen. And I think a perfect example of this is if you just look at who is in his cabinet. You had Peter Navarro on one side and Howard Lutnick on the other side, his commerce secretary, people that are very close to him. Navarro went to jail for him. So, these are people that are very close with him. But ultimately, he sided with 2 different views. Scott Bessent, his Treasury Secretary, I guess you could say Elon Musk, who's been in the role that he's been in, supporting the president. So, he has differing opinions around him. And I think he goes with what he feels is best for the American people and for the American worker. So I do think in his way of strategizing, he's never going to back down on what he said he's going to do. He'll do it. But then if people come with different ideas and negotiations and bring things to the table, he's willing to listen.
Okay. One of the other headline stories of the last 2-3 days out of the Trump administration has been his ongoing row, I should say, with Ivy League schools, particularly Harvard at the moment. President Trump called Harvard a joke. What's he got against that university?
Well, they're not following by the laws. The Supreme Court ruled a couple of years ago against Harvard on their admission standards. There are students there who are not able to pass math classes or taking remedial math classes. And as a Fox News reporter said, this is a school where valedictorians don't often get into. So what they've done is they've denigrated the degree just so that they can abide by the woke culture, the woke standards that have, happened in the country over the last 4 to 6 years. And so what I think he's trying to do is say, look, you have to abide by what the Supreme Court said, 1. 2, you have to make sure that you are doing a better job of screening the students that you're allowing into your university to make sure they don't hate America or hate Americans. And also, if you have $100 billion endowment, why are we, the taxpayers, funding $2 billion of grants for a university that is so well endowed? What about the historically Black colleges and universities in this country that don't have those endowments, or schools, for that matter, that just are not as wealthy and have the alumni base that Harvard does? So I think what President Trump is trying to say is he's trying to put all these universities on notice, whether it's Columbia, Harvard. He's just using Harvard as an example. But looking at all these universities, he's saying, check yourselves. Make sure that you're actually doing what is in the spirit and the law of the United States that you are supposed to be abiding by. In other words, stop with the standards that are being dumbed down to allow for certain races to be allowed into the university instead of people who should be there on their merits, like it should be. But he's also saying that, he's asking, why are we funding as U.S. taxpayers to the tune of billions of dollars to these universities if they are so well endowed and they're not abiding by our laws?
Yeah, okay, but I mean, everyone knows that students like a protest. They always have done. I mean, the US is famous for student protests going back as long as we can remember. I mean, Vietnam was a time when, in the 60s and 70s, that students were up in arms and on their campuses, burning flags and waving placards. They've been doing the same, albeit on a different issue with regards to the situation in Gaza, and yet they're being accused for protesting the humanitarian situation in Gaza, being accused of anti-Semitism. That seems to be very much at the heart, doesn't it, of President Trump's anger with this particular institution and other universities where we've seen similar protests?
I mean, I think it's a valid question to ask, why is $2 billion being given to a school with a $100 billion endowment? So let's start with that. Whether it's the anti-Semitism that Jewish students fear going onto campus because their schools are not protecting them sufficiently, that is something that has been in the news for the last year, and these schools don't seem to have done much about it. So President Trump wants to make sure everyone can go to school and feel safe to go to school and not be worried about someone who's a non-U.S. citizen, who's whether it's a green card holder status, a temporary student visa status. Those people do not have the same rights as U.S. citizens. And it is a privilege, going back to our previous conversation, it is a privilege, not a right, for them to be here. And there is certainly in the law a gray area that does not say that they have the same rights as a U.S. citizen does. So if you're coming here, be respectful, I think, is the first and foremost. You can protest, but if you're a U.S. citizen, you're protesting, no one's coming after you. But if you are not a U.S. citizen and you are committing what in any way seems to be anti-Semitic or in any way anti-anyone's religion, that is an issue. And that's what President Trump is taking aim at.
President Obama saying the freeze of funding for Harvard is unlawful. He's got a pretty strong legal background. I just wonder whether you think he's got an argument here.
Again, you know, they will take this to the courts. They will find the most beneficial venues that they can in federal courts. And by that, I mean they go venue shopping to find where the judges are more likely to be liberal leaning. So there will be a judge or two here or there that will agree with President Obama's position. But ultimately, this will likely, as have all these cases that we've been seeing over the course of the last few weeks, go to the Supreme Court. And you have a Supreme Court that is divided, and they have, on some issues, reached a unanimous conclusion. On some, they've been divided based on kind of party lines, if you will, although they're not partisan, but based on who appointed them. So again, these are constitutional questions that will be put in front of justices that have lifetime appointments and should be making the best decision for the American people.
Just lastly, I mean, Harvard, as we've been saying, has got no shortage of money. A $53 billion endowment, as we've been saying. It's the oldest, the wealthiest university in the United States. And it's got this long list of alumni, many of whom are in the world of politics. I mean, a very high concentration of clever, powerful, connected, rich people. I mean, is this a risky battle for President Trump to be picking?
I wonder how many of those really successful people think that their degree has been denigrated by having students admitted who can't pass a basic freshman level math class. So I think that they are looking to see Harvard change its ways. Maybe Harvard has kind of gotten mired in this whole wokeism and admitting people who should not be there. I come from a family of doctors, and I know that residency programs at UCLA, doctors have said these residents that are being admitted, they should not be admitted to this school. They are not at the level of this school, and they have basic misunderstandings of medical classes, medical courses, medical issues. And so I think you're seeing this not just at Harvard, but in schools throughout the country. And I think people are concerned about who's being admitted into these schools and who's being admitted into postgraduate programs that are the next future generations of doctors, lawyers, engineers, and the like in the United States. So we do need to make sure, and I think the alumni, to answer your question, of these universities wants to make sure that the same standards, the same difficult standards that they had to go through to get into those schools, that they too will continue to administer that, not what they've been doing for the last 20, 30 years.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Amanda Makki, a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you.
Well, for more, we can speak now to Scottie Nell Hughes, a Republican commentator and political strategist who joins us now from Tennessee. Scottie, great to have you with us once again. Spencer Critchley joins us too. He's a former advisor to President Obama's campaign team and the author of Patriots of Two Nations. He joins us from California. Spencer and Scottie, thanks for joining us. Scottie, let me start with you. We were listening to a clip before we crossed you of former President Joe Biden lambasting President Donald Trump on this issue of Social Security. I want to get your opinion. Should a former president be speaking out so soon after leaving the White House?
Well, the traditional past decorum that used to exist between the White House and past presidents and the current has kind of been thrown out of the window, just like with every other tradition that is in the United States. Some of that is good, but some of it also speaks to where our current state of politics is here in the United States. Obviously, Joe Biden is still going to be very upset about what has happened to not only the country, but his party. I mean, everything that Donald Trump has done in the first 100 days has been to reverse what Donald Trump considers to be the Biden's policies of his 4 years. And so, of course, Biden is taking every news cycle that happens as personal because it's basically trying to destroy all of the legacy that Biden tried to leave in the White House. So obviously, while I wish that it was different, obviously it's to be expected.
Okay, Spencer, is it President Biden's place to weigh in, do you think, 85 days into a new presidential term?
You know, I actually wish that he would not, even though, of course, many Democrats would point to the behavior of President Trump in constantly criticizing Joe Biden, often in the most insulting terms. But I think this is one of the traditions we have to win back in this country in order to preserve our democracy. It can often seem very artificial, the way politicians have traditionally referred to, their opponent as their honorable friend, for example, in Congress, when he or she probably hates that other person's guts. But democracy depends on that old-fashioned anyways. So it's obviously fair game to have the most vigorous debates about policy, but the attacks on the person are destructive to democracy because it shifts our focus away from what should really matter, which is the policies that serve the American people best, not sort of worldwide wrestling entertainment combat between individual personalities. I also think that as much as I like and respect President Biden, I think it's time for the Democratic Party to move forward with new leaders, and it doesn't need to be any judgment on him.
Okay, Scottie, anything you'd like to pick up on there? And also, I mean, when it comes to personal attacks, I mean, I think Spencer's getting at, for example, President Trump calling former President Biden a moron and most recently said he didn't have a clue what he was doing. I mean, is that kind of thing helpful?
Well, I do want to add this. I think Spencer's absolutely correct in the fact that the Democrats are trying to move on. I mean, this morning, the headline, from what I consider to be one of the most liberal media outlets in America today, the Daily Beast, actually has Biden's decision to return to the public eye has Democrats furious. And I think that actually speaks for a lot of Democrats right now who are seeing a little bit of hope when they're watching Bernie Sanders at Coachella and they have AOC speaking to thousands, because numbers now matter at rallies to Democrats. Speaking to thousands in Las Vegas, they feel like there's a sense of hope to be able to reclaim, at least in the midterm elections. And they're wanting to go down that path and not remind their own base, their own party, of what life was like under Joe Biden. So I think to Spencer's point, and let's just point out, when Barack Obama came out after he was out of office, you still had just as much of adoration from the Democratic Party for him. You're not going to see that for Joe Biden, mainly because he really didn't get to end his race. He had to turn over the reins to the horse before it was time to somebody that he wasn't even necessarily supportive of himself, especially in those last few days.
Sure, and just turning to you, Spencer, I mean, President Barack Obama, the former president, generally refrains, doesn't he, from criticizing White House policies, and he's maintained that. On the whole, there have been some exceptions, but that's sort of, is that what you'd like to see President Biden sort of doing, or rather not doing?
Yes, and I would say, in particular, if you are going to speak out, and this is true of President Obama when he has spoken out against President Trump or candidate Trump when he was still running, it has been about preserving democracy, not to criticize him on particular policies. And I think that's a very important distinction. To me, by far, the most important issue the United States faces right now is what kind of country are we going to be? And this has nothing to do with whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a member of any other party, or an independent. There are certain fundamental principles. This is, if I may refer to my own book, as you kindly did, Patriots of Two Nations. What I was talking about there is that people can be very patriotic to the United States and deeply disagree with each other because they, in effect, live in two different nations. They have two different visions of what the United States should be. It's legitimate to debate that. Now, if you believe in democracy at a certain point, you feel like you have to draw a line and say, look, we can disagree about what kind of democracy we should have, but I cannot abide the thought that we're not going to have a democracy at all. And I think it's when President Obama has been concerned that we might be losing our democracy, that's when he has spoken out. I think that's appropriate. In general, though, I don't think people need to hear from former presidents about their opinions on specific issues like Social Security or anything else. I agree with Joe Biden's comments about Social Security, but I don't think we necessarily need to hear from him about it.
Scottie, let's talk, though, specifically about Social Security, given that's what President Biden chose to speak out on for the first time since leaving the White House. I mean, Elon Musk says that the whole Social Security system is beset by fraud. I mean, is there much proof of that?
Well, and that's where this comes, where actions speak louder than words. Obviously, Joe Biden can come out and criticize Donald Trump's moves and Elon Musk to try to cut all of the waste and to make it more efficient. Because I think if anybody's had to deal with the American Social Security system, they would agree, especially over the last 4 to 8 years, that it is 100% broken and there is something not right. It's not effective. It is not something that is easily manageable for the common person to handle. Usually it's very complicated. And so I think, that message resonates, that Elon Musk, and I think Americans are celebrating right now if they can continue to point out that there is waste, which they have pointed out some very legitimate cases where the system had not been purged. But that's where Joe Biden's words do not back up by his actions. If Joe Biden really cared about Social Security, if he really cared, as the words they said, about every person being treated decent regardless of what your wealth status was, then he would have done better to try to actually eliminate the waste, do the same things that Donald Trump's doing. I don't see what Trump is doing in regards to Doge and trying to update the systems and purge of old records and fraudulent records. I don't see that being a Republican or a Democrat issue. I see that being a good versus bad, morals versus immoral groups, ethical versus unethical. I don't see this political lines. And I think that is where the message that, Joe Biden can get out there and read it, but nobody ever saw him actually do anything about it when he had the chance to. That's why his words are just kind of fall on deaf ears.
Okay, Spencer, is the Social Security system in the United States the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time, as Elon Musk says it is?
No, this is absolutely not true, at least in terms of him having been able to present any evidence to demonstrate it. In fact, as several observers have noted, including people who are very skeptical about big government, Musk has unintentionally done an audit of Social Security and other government systems, which those systems have passed with flying colors so far. The Doge keeps having to revise down its claims about this waste and fraud and abuse. In one notorious case, the number $8 billion turned out actually to be $8 million. And one of, Musk's brilliant young engineers was confused about the difference between those two numbers, apparently. There is no evidence of these supposed 150-year-old people being paid Social Security. This has been roundly debunked. When you look at the numbers, you can see that it's actually impossible if you just look at the number of people over the age of 100 who are receiving Social Security benefits, who are alive. There are fewer of them than the total population of Americans who are over 100. I think it's only about half of those people are receiving Social Security benefits. Now, of course, there's always room to improve a massive, I think $1.2 trillion system. There is going to be some waste in that system, and President Biden actually did do quite a lot of work in improving the efficiency of the Social Security Administration, which is supposed to be the goal here, Department of Government efficiency. What we've seen instead is this, chainsaw-like, to use Musk's own imagery, attack, firing thousands and thousands of Social Security employees, eliminating phone and in-person service when, let's think about who Social Security recipients are, by and large, they're older people who are not familiar with the web in many cases and are going to need to use the phone. And so they're taking this problem that supposedly exists, at least in terms of efficiency, and making it far, far worse.
Okay, Scottie, give you a chance to respond to that. I mean, where is the smoking gun? Has the Doge really unearthed anything as sensational as all that?
Well, I want to use the word that you originally said. You said Ponzi scheme. That was your question. You cannot look at a system that is estimated to be completely depleted of all funds by 2033 and 2036 if Washington, D.C. doesn't anything. That's a Ponzi scheme.
It won't be
Because I won't be
completely,
at
it
the
won't
age
be
of
completely
retirement,
depleted.
yet I will
The
have
trust
paid into
fund
Social Security
will
my
need to
entire
be
life,
topped up.
and it won't be there. So you have to go, why is it going to be bankrupt? Why is there not going to be any funds in there because of the actions of Washington, D.C.? So ultimately, it does show that to many Americans, especially of the 30 and 40 something age generation, they go, it is a Ponzi scheme because we're paying into something that we potentially could never use. Now, let's talk about Elon Musk and his fraud. There has been a long time. Campaigns and politicians have long time on both sides of the aisle have campaigned on fraud and waste in government spending, with the entitlement programs like Social Security being one of the main examples they've used. Why Democrats are angry is because Washington, D.C. is actually trying to do something about it. Sure, is there probably a couple facts out there that are not right or things are being exaggerated? I hate to think that, but I'm not in there doing the audit. But once again, you're seeing a lot more activity coming out of this administration than you ever saw about the Biden administration. And when people do hear of funds, and they can witness their own eyes, Americans are not stupid. They look around and they go, where is all of the money that America is bringing, that my taxpayers dollars are going to? Where is it? And when they see examples of waste that is happening, whether you're talking about our welfare system, whether you're talking about Social Security, and then when they go and try to apply for it themselves or for their parents, and they see that their parents only get a $1,200 check a month and can barely even live on it, they realize that there's obviously something wrong with the system and it needs to be fixed. And at least Trump's doing something about it.
Okay, Spencer, Trump is doing something about it. Why didn't President Biden do something about it? He's a bit late.
As I say, President Biden did. He improved the efficiency of the Social Security Department and made sure that it did work better for people. And by and large, it actually does work amazingly well. Those checks go out. The people who are entitled to them receive them reliably month after month after month. And if they have a problem, until recently, they'd be able to get somebody on the phone. They might have to wait. Now they can, under the current plan, they won't be able to get somebody on the phone at all. They might be required to come in person, using a walker or a wheelchair, as we've seen happening. This whole idea that somehow the entitlement programs are riven with waste, fraud, and abuse is a real hobby horse that's been around for decades. Now, this again doesn't mean that these systems shouldn't be made more efficient or that we should not address things like the coming shortfall in the Social Security Trust Fund. But every time people go looking to find this mythical monster of enormous waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government, they don't find it. They will find inefficiency, and there are ample opportunities to reform systems. And this has been pursued under President Obama's administration as well, and notably under President Clinton. This is one of the things Vice President Gore was in charge of with the whole Reinventing Government initiative. So there is potential there for improvement. There always is, but that's not what we're seeing here. We're not seeing these audits. I said, they've conducted an informal audit by making outrageous claims about all the enormous waste, fraud, and abuse they're going to find and then failing to find it. But one of the big problems here is they haven't bothered with audits. They've just wholesale fired thousands of employees and then often later had to go back and try to track them down and rehire them when they found out those persons were vitally important, such as people making sure that our nuclear weapons are being handled safely, or the people in charge of preventing the spread of extremely dangerous diseases are brought back. Now, in terms of danger to Social Security, this is a real issue that Scottie points out, and Democrats and Republicans have been dodging this issue for a very long time. It's not that it's a Ponzi scheme. It's actually straightforward in how to fix this issue. It's the trust fund, which is like a reserve fund, kind of a rainy day fund, that under present usage will start to become inadequate in the year 2033. And if nothing is done between now and then, the government will have to start reducing benefits. The system will not go bankrupt. It is not a Ponzi scheme. This is real money that's being collected, and it's people getting their own money back when they retire. But given demographic developments, that trust fund is going to have to be topped up, or else, certain kinds of requirements with Social Security, who pays Social Security tax, for example, wealthy people, for example, or what is the retirement age, we're going to have to actually address those issues, or we actually will have a problem. But this whole idea that the problem is that illegal immigrants are somehow collecting Social Security, when in fact what they do is they pay into Social Security and are never able to collect. So they're actually a net benefit to everybody else in that way, or that there's enormous fraud with dead people collecting Social Security. This is just not true.
All right, let's Scottie jump in, because I can tell you've got some issues we'd like to pick up on there that Spencer's just been mentioning. Go ahead, Scottie.
Well, we can debate whether or not there's been fraud found. From my perspective, I see that it is, but it doesn't matter, because the American people with their own eyes, this was one of the main reasons why I do believe that Democrats lost wholeheartedly across the board in November. I don't need to look at a politician or even you and I on television. I hate to disrespect our own jobs and our own roles here, but the American people can see themselves that there's problems with our government, and it's too big, it's too inflated, the waste and fraud is happening, that they are having issues trying to get on Social Security if they have to, or unemployment if they ever need to. They are finding that our government today is not working for the American people, and they found that overwhelmingly, so much so that they voted the Democrats, the people who were in power, out of office in November. So you and I can go back and forth on whether it's true or not and what the facts of the situation is, but I'm actually going to trust the American people's, what the American people out in Main Street are seeing, and they are seeing waste and fraud, a larger than life government, a very much inflated government, and they decided they wanted to do something different. And so therefore, what they're seeing right now in the headlines of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and they are seeing a list of people, and they are seeing those that are here illegally taking advantage of our welfare system, because it is happening. They are getting checks. They are being put up in five-star hotels in New York City. The American people are not dumb. They can see with their own eyes what is happening, and they voted for change and action, and that is what has happened these first 100 days with Donald Trump.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed to both our guests, Scottie Nell Hughes and Spencer Critchley. A pleasure talking to you both. Moving on now, and a little earlier on, we were talking about pressure being applied to certain US universities by the Trump administration, which follows on from last year's protests against Israel's war in Gaza, which has swept right across US campuses. Well, the Trump administration accuses some of those academic institutions of anti-Semitism and support for Hamas. Well, in Gaza itself, Palestinians have today been searching through the rubble of a house in Jabalia, following on from an Israeli strike which killed several people. Amongst those killed were 3 young children. Well, the death toll since the start of the conflict in Gaza now stands at least 51,000. Well, let's get more. We can speak to Miri Eisin, who is an expert from the International Institute for Counter Terrorism and a retired colonel in the Israeli Defense Force. She joins us now from Tel Aviv. Colonel, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We've been hearing about fresh air and ground attacks across Gaza. In fact, there's been several of them since mid-March. What sort of targets are being struck, given that so much of Gaza is rubble anyway?
The Hamas are still there. Hamas prepared themselves, Tom, for almost 20 years. They built hundreds of kilometers of that underground subterranean arena, and Israel is working systematically in a very systematic way that doesn't make it nice, it doesn't make it easy to attack both the subterranean arena. That's what gives them mobility. It gives them protection. It allows them to continue to be. And these are the type of sites that Israel is attacking. I know that you know as well. They have fired single rockets, and we attack them as well, attacking the different terrorists who both attacked inside Israel. It means that ongoing, you're gathering information with your different intelligence sources, trying to develop new ones, and trying to be sure that the Palestinians, not Hamas, that the Palestinians and us can get through this, and to try to destroy as much of Hamas as possible. Not of the Gaza Strip, and I know it doesn't look that way, but of Hamas. It's the way that they built themselves within the Gaza Strip.
It's hard to understand what's left of Hamas, given the fact that this has been carrying on for 18 months, and how are they managing to rearm, for instance?
Well, one of the things that they did is they prepared themselves for almost 20 years. Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005. That's 20 years ago. I have been talking about the subterranean arena as a colonel, as somebody who speaks on behalf of Israel for dozens of years. So when you say what's left, they built this long term. They built that underground arena, Tom, not to defend the people of the Gaza Strip, not to help the Palestinians, but to protect themselves, to have the hostages there as collateral damage within it for themselves, or more protection. So they have lots left. When I say lots, you see that they still can fire rockets. If before this they said they had 15,000 rockets and they have fired 12,000 rockets or so, that means they still have some thousand that they hide deep underground, bring them out to fire at Israel, because what they want to show is that they still exist, that they're still doing resistance. And at the end, it's on the back of all of us. It's horrific what it's done for the Palestinians, to the Gaza Strip, that we did that. And I'm very aware that we did that. It is Hamas that built themselves to do so. And they still have capabilities, especially that subterranean arena. It gives them the capability to move around the Gaza Strip underground, protected, and then pop up where they want to fire or be in their presence.
I mean, you make the distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people. And yet, it's been 7 weeks since any humanitarian aid was allowed into the Gaza Strip. The humanitarian situation is being described as being at the worst point yet in what's been, as we've been saying, a horrific conflict. At what point do you think Israel will reconsider the admission of aid into Gaza?
So let's distinguish here in that sense between both the government, the military itself, subordinate to the government, and within that, there's a unit called the Coordination of the Government inside the occupied territories, in this case, COGAT, who have constantly said we should never have stopped the humanitarian supply. Here, Tom, I'm going to be openly critical of the decisions of the Israeli government. I'm allowed to be critical of it. That doesn't mean that I think everything they do is both great or bad. But in this case, I do not see the impact itself of stopping the humanitarian help. What the Israeli government will tell you, and I'm not a government spokesperson, is that they will say that that's the only thing that actually really pressures Hamas. I can't say they're wrong, but I disagree with them. For me, every human being deserves water, food. That's a basic. I don't like the fact that we've stopped it. What Israel is saying that they're doing is to make sure that that doesn't get to Hamas. Again, that it wasn't getting to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, that it was being taken over by Hamas, both distributed by them, hijacked by them, enabling them to survive. And in that sense, that's what Israel is trying to do. I disagree, but I understand where it's coming from.
Sure, we appreciate you, Colonel, being so frank with us. And you know, there's been so many adjectives, so many ways to describe the situation in Gaza. I mean, it's sort of as though we've all run out of ways to describe it. But the medical charity Doctors Without Borders described Gaza today as a mass grave. I mean, clearly the situation getting much worse. And I'm just wondering, you know, whether you as an Israeli citizen feel that, you know, the treatment of those 2.4 million people living in Gaza represent a much longer term problem to Israel's national security, in the sense that there will be 2.4 million people whose lives have been severely affected. They've endured tragedy and great hardship. And I'm not marginalizing or trivializing what happened on the 7th of October. I'm just talking about those 2.4 million people. Do you think they could, in the longer term, pose a threat to Israel's national security, given the pent-up hatred?
The pent-up hatred was there before October 7th, Tom. That's why they could stand up and do what they do and do it gleefully. And in that sense, I'm going to say I'm one of those who most definitely want to reach out, want to talk, but it can't be with Hamas, because at the end, here I am sitting in Hamas before October 7th, very openly. And since then, Hamas, not the Palestinian people inside the Gaza Strip, call for my annihilation. And they still claim to be in control. I don't think they're in control. They still want to show that they're the ones that you have to talk through. Excuse me. And I think that what we need to be looking at is at the 2.4 million people, and to hope that we can all together get rid of Hamas, not just for the Palestinian people, I would say for all of the greater Middle East. The example of what they did, of investing in building, as you've said yourself, how are they still there? Because they invested in building something for 20 years that benefited Hamas, not the Palestinian people inside the Gaza Strip. That isn't about excusing Israel for what we're doing. This is a war. It is ugly. It breaks my heart. As you said, it's a tragedy. Having said that, I want it to be over. I will remind all of our viewers right now that today Hamas put out a clip of a young man that they took on October 7th that we didn't know he was alive until today. They've held him for the last 558 days without ever saying if he was alive at all. And I say that as one example because last week they did the same thing on a different young man. And that's about Hamas. It's not about the tens of thousands of people. It isn't making it better. I'm just saying there's a very easy resolution. End it. It's called Hamas Stand Up. They can say that they recognize us. They can say that we're here. They can bring back the hostages. There are lots of things they could do. And I don't know how to get out of it. As I said, it's a tragedy, and I wish it would end today, not tomorrow.
Colonel, there are some signs of some progress, potentially. We've had some false starts, lots of them over the last 18 months. But there is this new truce offer from Israel, release 10 living hostages, and in return, you'll get a 45-day ceasefire. That's one offer. Hamas has also put an offer out there saying, if there's a serious prisoner swap, they will consider releasing all the hostages. Do you see any cause for optimism with those sorts of offers being discussed this week?
I think that there will be a deal. The issue is that here, Tom, inside Israel, that deal in that sense is really Solomon the Wise didn't know what to do with two mothers who came and said that the baby's there, and he said, cut the baby in half. Would you want to be the person who gets to choose who are the 10 live hostages who've been held since October 7th who get to come home and go talk to the mothers, the families, the children of the other 14 who aren't going to come? It's most definitely benefits Hamas to prolong it, to do it in that way. It's tearing Israel apart. So yes, I do think that there is cause for a deal. I can't use the word optimism because as long as they hold any number of live and the dead hostages themselves, they're using it to fragment Israeli society. And I don't want to blame us for the fragmentation of Israeli society. If you saw both the clips that they put out are so horrific, but what people don't realize is that until today, we never saw that young man for the last 558 days, and the way that he talks tears our heart out. And so I understand that there will be a deal. I think it's better to have some deal, but I wouldn't want to be the mother, the child, the sister, or the brother of the other people who are not going to be coming out in such a deal, because Hamas will continue to hold them.
Sure. I mean, one thing that someone from Hamas might say were they here, and we haven't spoken to anyone from Hamas for quite some time, but they might say there was a ceasefire deal that was struck on the 19th of January. It included multiple hostage prisoner swap initiatives. It lasted 2 months and then it disintegrated. Why isn't that ceasefire deal still in place?
Because Hamas was using it to reestablish itself as much as it can as the ruler over the Gaza Strip. And Tom, I'm an Israeli, and I wouldn't call myself extreme to either side. I want to live here. And tomorrow morning, as an idea, I can't live here knowing that Hamas is ruling over the Gaza Strip. Hamas planned the October 7th assault for years. They built that underground subterranean arena for dozens of years. And so for me, in that sense, when you say when they're rebuilding themselves, when they're gathering strength, that's not good news, not for the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, certainly not for Israel. I'll even go so far as to say not for the rest of the Middle East. I think that it emboldens Hamas, that there are additional organizations and capabilities in the Middle East who back them. I think that the backing that Hamas get, I'm not talking about the Palestinians, I'm out there for the Palestinians, but the backing that Hamas gets emboldens them, that they don't have to change anything, that in their charter they can continue to call Jews pigs and dogs, and they can continue to call for the annihilation of the state of Israel and rule over there. So it isn't just, an either or. They came in, they took the hostages, and for a moment, as I say, I can't equivalent the amount of people that we have killed and we have in the Gaza Strip to what they did. But I want to remind all of us, we have never targeted innocent people, and every single time that we've been called out in this specific war, that we targeted for some reason innocent people, if it's doctors or medical, etc., we go and check ourselves. We need to stay in that moral arena. We're not targeting civilians ever, and yet we have killed so many. So in this tragedy that's there, I look at Hamas, I look at those who back Hamas, and there are a lot of them out there, and I can't embrace the Palestinians. That would be very patronizing of me. But I want to hope in that sense that the next stage in the Gaza Strip is not one for the people in the Gaza Strip that is run by Hamas, that is backed by Hamas, or that any of these governments around the world back such an organization that both plans, enacts, and continues to talk in the way that it does and act in the way that it does against the existence of the State of Israel.
Just lastly, Colonel, I mean, we've had, as we've been saying, 18 months of this violence. 51,000 people, we're told, the majority of them civilians, have been killed in Gaza. We've been saying that there is some cause for optimism, for some sort of a deal at some point. I mean, when do you think this might happen? I mean, what would be your hunch? Another 18 months or in the very much nearer future than that?
So I'm going to breathe in deep, Tom, and I'm going to say that looking at it from the Hamas point of view, I'm not even doing it from the Israeli. Everybody likes to put all of this on Israel. From the Hamas point of view, they want to delay it as much as possible. They are fragmenting Israeli society by holding the hostages, by putting out these little clips. And if they can do that for all of 2025, they will absolutely try to do so. I don't for a moment think that Israel is not a side in this. But at the end, we're the ones who have to give. We have to give people who were arrested, put on trial, found guilty, and put into jails. All of those that we have to let go, we're going to have to let go. But we also are going to have to leave the Gaza Strip. And to do so, knowing that Hamas is going to take over, that's a pretty big step, even for me. And I want every hostage back immediately. So I don't think that this is going to happen soon because of Hamas, not because of Israel.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Colonel Miri Eisin, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.